Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. The Emirates Thoracic Society would like to welcome you to this panel discussion on the impact of Philips Field Safety Notice on patient management in Middle East. I'd like to introduce myself, Mohammed Al-Hukani from UAE University. I'm also representing the Emirates Thoracic Society. We're lucky today, we have experts from the US, Professor Peter Gay, who's a pulmonologist and sleep specialist at Mayo Clinic, American College of Chest Physician. We also have Dr. Mary Louise Kosa, who's a pulmonary and sleep disease specialist, Associate Professor of Clinical Medicine, School of Medicine, Lebanese American University, Lebanon, and Head of the Respiratory Division and Sleep Center at Lumak Risk Hospital, Beirut, Lebanon. I'd like also to welcome Dr. Shireen Syoufi, who's a consultant pulmonary medicine, Head of Pulmonary and Sleep Medicine at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Dr. Sulaiman Khadada, who's a specialist respirology, critical care, and sleep medicine, Mubarak Al-Kabir Hospital. Welcome all, and just to give you a background, so on June 14 of this year, Philips issued a voluntary field safety notice, international markets, for specific Philips BiPAP and CPAP devices. It's to address identified potential health risk related to the polyester-based polyurethane sounds abatement foam components in these devices. The risk includes that the foam may degrade into particles which may enter the device air pathway and be ingested or inhaled by the user. And the foam may off-gas certain chemical due to use of unapproved cleaning methods, such as ozone and high heat and high humidity environments, which may also contribute to foam degradation. On this slide, you see all the affected devices, which are the most popular Philips devices when it comes to sleep medicine. Almost most of the available CPAPs, auto CPAPs, BiPAP, including the Omni labs for titration and many of the sleep labs, and some of the mechanical ventilators. There are some devices, as you see on this list, that are not affected because they're using a new abatement foam material. On the Philips websites, which I always recommend all my patients to visit, as well as the caregiver, there is a statement regarding the medical device field safety notice. Philips said that patients unaffected bi-level CPAPs and BiPAP devices should discontinue the use of their devices and consult with their physician. They also said, however, relevant authorities in the European Union, UK, have provided their guidance as follows: to please contact your physician or care provider before making any changes to your prescribed therapy. Together with their physician, patients should determine if the benefit of continuing therapy with the device outweighs the risk identified. For patients on affected life-sustaining mechanical ventilator devices, do not discontinue or alter prescribed therapy without consulting with physician. Sorry, I think we're jumping here. Yes. Now, on the website, there's a call center and device registration for both the medical equipment providers, patients, and caregiver and physician. There's also a hotline which looks like based on UK, as you see in there. And again, we encourage all the patients to visit the website and register their devices. Now, moving to, since then, there were a couple of societies' recommendations from both the American Association of Sleep Medicine, the ATS, American Thoracic Society, and the European Respiratory Society. And I may ask Dr. Mary just to summarize the recommendation of ERS. Dr. Mary?
Yes, so that's just to point out that the magnitude of the problem is not very important. It has been assessed at around 0.03% of complaints in 2020. I think that all the societies that you mentioned are, okay about these recommendations. So they recommend to assess the situation and to balance the real and potential acute and chronic risk for the patient due to physical or chemical injury on the one hand, against the acute and chronic risk of cessation of the treatment of their disease for which they are treated by these devices. And this decision should be taken on an individual basis. We have no evidence of acute life-threatening incidents with patients using the PAP treatment. There have been a small number of adverse event reports. As I said, the numbers are very small, describing features such as cough, headache, and sinus infection in users. Therefore, the patient should not stop or change their treatment, even if they receive notification from the manufacturer. And as was said in number one, in the statement number one, we have to balance the risk of stopping the treatment versus the real risk of being exposed to an injury.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mary. It seems that, again, all the recommendation through the whole society is do not stop or change treatment until you talk to your caregiver. Now, the caregiver or the physician would then outweigh the risk and benefits, and there are many examples of a sample of patient assessment. And I may ask Professor Peter Gay to give us an examples of how to assess patients and decision on continuing using the devices.
Well, thank you, Dr. Al-Hukani, and maybe you'll move to the first blow-up slide. This is the overall picture of what we put together in a discussion with. Yes, this is very good. And thank you for the invitation and the chance to share with you. Ultimately, we were trying to help physicians.
I don't know, maybe you're muted, but I cannot hear you. Yes, you're good. You're good, sorry.
Is that good? Okay.
Yes.
Again, I'm Dr. Peter Gay from the Mayo Clinic, and this was something we actually put together at Mayo and shared with the American Thoracic Society, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and I represented the American College of Chest Physicians. And we tried to get a menu together to enable our physicians who really want some guidance of how to walk through a discussion with patients, because the patients that are going to use their device anyway, they're not a problem. The patients who won't use their device under any circumstances now, they're really not a problem because they're going to stop. The ones who want to talk to you and understand what you're going to say need some kind of script. And this is the advice that we came up with. From the first diamond that you see here, obviously, you're going to continue those devices. If indeed those aren't pertinent, then we want to know something about the comorbidities. If you've got bad chronic obstructive pulmonary disease with hypercapnia, or hypoventilation from ALS or neuromuscular disease, pulmonary hypertension, cardiac arrhythmias, those are considerations that certainly after discussion with us, our nurses or even the physicians talking to patients are going to strongly advise, look, let's continue with your machine, probably get you a filter, because there's no exposure unless there's particulate degradation. And whether your machine is doing that or not, we can't really tell right now. You may see actually these particles in the airway, and if you do, there's likely degradation, but very few patients have reported this. There are about 1,300 particle degradation reports out of the 16 million devices, and only about 600 of those were actually patient-related devices. So again, as Dr. Kusa said, these are very small numbers. But if you would like some peace of mind to eliminate the particulate matter, then these will eliminate the likely things that are causing the bronchospastic problems that cause the original alert And that was really a patient that required nebulizer therapy for a little bronchospasm. So again, certainly not life-threatening. And that we would advise, talk to your physician, make a decision, decide about a filter, and then move on. Why don't you go to the next slide here, Dr. Oz? There's also circumstances of your lifestyle that's very important, especially as they relate to sleepiness. If you're a very sleepy person at risk for problems in day-to-day living, even falling down the stairs, but most importantly, driving. If you're a school bus driver, if you are working in traffic control, or you're an actual pilot, obviously this isn't a good idea to discontinue your device. And there are certain people who are extremely dependent on their sleep quality for mood disorders. We may even, after discussion, say, yeah, that's a reason not to discontinue your device. If we do say, maybe you can delay and you're very uncomfortable with this, well, you can try to get an alternative device that isn't affected. Some of the Philips aren't, but all of the ResMed are safe. We can even talk about alternative treatments, positional therapy, perhaps, even sitting in a recliner, starting more serious diet control. There's a number of things we can do, but we've urged the physician, look, just document your discussion so that you can say you shared, to the best of your knowledge, those risks, and they are known to the patient to be difficult to assess in terms of these volatile organic compounds. And they are clearly the most difficult to put into perspective. There's one particular agent that is called dimethyldiazine. It's an oxide that clearly is mutagenic. It causes problems with DNA repair. And it, as a carcinogen, will get through these filters. They were tested in mouse cells. So how much effect they would have over the next 10 years in a human being, we can't tell you. But if personally you have great concern about these things, then it's not something that we can prevent with a filter, and you will have to decide between balancing these and your fear of these over the long term, which we can't give you any more information about now. And frankly, there won't be, because this is a 5-10-year exposure kind of thing. You'll have to decide how much angst and peace of mind you're getting with just the bacterial filter or this unknown risk of cancer. So maybe I'll stop there in the interest of time and assume that we'll get to some of your other questions during the question and answer. Is that all right, Dr. Al-Hukani?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Professor Gay. This is really a nice workflow that can be adopted, and it can be adjusted depending on the practice. Now, moving forward, maybe I'll ask Dr. Suleiman to talk about their experience and what they've done so far.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, and thank you to the ETS for organizing this in such short notice. So I can tell you in Kuwait what our Sleep Society, in conjunction working locally with our government as well as our dealer for the Philips distributor, we decided to take a very similar approach in terms of what Dr. Peter Gay is doing. And really it's to classify patients and consider them to continue treatment or not, depending if they have basically certain risk factors. What we did is we divided patients into groups, and we believe that will serve two folds. Number one, it will allow us to decide which patient should continue treatment and which patient should or more likely stop the therapy, although we believe that the risk is quite small, and our message to the public has been in conjunction with ERS and other societies is quite clear, is do not stop your therapy until you've spoken to your healthcare provider. The other decision that we took was to divide the patients into groups, is when it comes time to replacement or repair, this way we'll have some way of classifying patients who will get priority for this replacement. Because I think, as Dr. Peter might tell it, Dr. Gay might tell us later, that this process won't be happening overnight. It will probably take a good amount of time, maybe a year, to happen. And there's nothing really amazing about this. So Group A, the patients on mechanical ventilators or serious medical problems, and Group B is basically if you have symptoms. If you move on to the next slide, Dr. Mohammed. And what we've said is if you're in group A and B, you should basically continue your therapy. We put in a consider using a filter. And if you're in group B or C or D, which is basically compliant patients not meeting these criteria, or D, is to consider stopping your therapy. And the key word is consider stopping or continuing therapy until repair or replacement. And either way, I think we're all in agreement that you have to document this decision and follow up. We're using this framework locally to help us, again, not just decide who to continue or stop therapy, but also when it comes time to replacement, we have some sort of classification to prioritize our replacement. I think you can move on, Dr. Mohammed.
Sure. So we're talking now about, and many questions is about the filters, the antibacterial filters. And I know that you've done some work on it, Dr. Suleiman. Would you like to talk about it?
Of course. So, I mean, I'll tell you what we've been doing with filters, and I know, but before I do, I'm putting this disclaimer there, which is, again, these antibacterial HME filters have not been approved for CPAP or BiPAP machines. Certainly, their risk in altering the foam degradation process is unknown, especially, again, we don't think that the filters will be able to stop the volatile organic compounds, which are probably the things of the most major concern. They definitely will stop the foam particles just because of pore size. And again, I'm not recommending the wide usage of filters because of this. However, we are using, I can tell you locally, filters, and we are making recommendations on a patient-by-patient basis for filters. And it turns out, actually, there's a lot of practical considerations if you decide to use a filter. For example, what filter should you use? Should you use a regular antibacterial filter, HME filter? Should you use fixed variable modes? What pressure should you use? A humidifier versus no humidifier? Mask, are all masks compatible? What tube size, heated tube, or you should use? And the effect actually the effect of this on compliance. And the key question is, how long should you using these filters? And are there enough? I think you have to ask yourself always, are there enough filters available locally? So I think we've been at our lab, thanks to my techs, we've been doing a lot of data. This is older data, and I'm sorry, it's again short notice, didn't have time to label everything. So when you use a fixed mode, and this is just 3 machines that we ran on different pressures, there's a difference about 0.5 to 1.5 in terms of centimeters water between the set pressure and the measured pressure. And this is just at 5-minute intervals at each pressure. We've also ran devices, if you go to the next slide, for over 72 hours. And in this, we've generated since then a ton of other data that we've shared with Philips's. Here again, we've ran a few, I've just shown the data for pressure at 20 at different humidity levels, humidity 5, 3, and 0, or an HME filter. And it seems that and this is using a closed circuit actually, so the humidity is not dissipated. It seems that the filters, the pressure that we record seems to be consistent at least for 72 hours of continuous usage. And whether you use a pressure of 14 or 20, there's about a difference of pressure of maximum 1 to 1.5 centimeters of water. So again, and it also depends on how you set up the filter. So here I've shown you the way we've, in picture number 1 to the right-hand side, is we've used a filter approximately towards near the machine. And you can see here, actually, the main problem is you can't use a heated, humidified, sorry, not a humidified, a heated tubing when you do use it approximately like this. And then picture number 2 is when we've done without the humidifier using an HME filter setup. If your patient, however, wants to use the heated tubing, you might consider doing what we've done in picture number 3, which is basically put the filter more distally. And in this mask, which has it's a nice big full face mask with a stabilization for the forehead, it seems to work okay. However, if you move on to the next line, as our chief technician here has demonstrated locally, if you try to do that on more like a nasal mask, the weight of the filters can be quite bothersome, and it actually doesn't work if you're trying to use a heated tube in these situations. So I can tell you, we've generated since then a ton of other data, and what we've been doing is if we've decided a patient's using a filter and using their device and using a filter, we've so far been looking at putting them on fixed, knowing that there are certain limitations. And I can tell you also, we are looking at auto CPAPs and auto BiPAPs at the moment, and I'm sure Dr. Gay will share probably some of that data, and I know Philips has been looking into that as well.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Sulaiman. Excellent work. And maybe now back to Professor Peter Gay. What's your thought about filters? Now, there's a clear statement that, yes, it can be utilized for non-invasive ventilation by Philips, but there's no clear statement when it comes to CPAP and BiPAP. What's your thought?
Well, Philips is going to continue to say that the filter is not recommended, more to please the lawyers than to please any patients, because it will not do anything to the volatile organic compounds, which really prompted the FDA recall. So if you look at just the micron size, the real particles are coming off at about 3 microns, and the filters will certainly carry 0.5 micron pore size. You're 10 times protected by pore size for the particulate matter, and that's what actually caused the symptomatic complaints that brought this to light in terms of bronchospasm. So you're probably going to get rid of that. But again, since the volatile organic compounds, the things that I told you about that are mutagenic, interfere with DNA repair, will not be affected by this, Philips will never recommend using the filter. And if they are available, our patients, I'll just tell you, are finding some peace of mind from that. And for $2 to $3, that's pretty cheap peace of mind. So even though the general recommendation is to say, don't run out and grab a filter, I do allow my patients complete freedom to go get a filter and get themselves their peace of mind for $2. There's a lot less peace of mind you can buy for $2 anywhere in the world I know of. Philips has shared with me that, in fact, from their performance assessment, much as Dr. Sulaiman shared with you, a very elegant work, Doctor, that indeed it's a matter of centimeters of water resistor affects performance, but it's affecting the actual readout of the numbers. And since many are self-adjusting, certainly for the automatic PAP levels, they'll be fine. The fixed CPAP levels you may have to adjust, but most people who are using automatic PAP, this should not really have much of an effect. The filter, if you're using with a lot of heated humidity, and we're maybe going to talk more about that soon, that's going to be a problem with these filters. And then generally, I don't think there'll be a problem with where you put the filter, because we're just telling our patients you really need to stay away from the heat. That's a concern for these more rapid degradation, but maybe the Passover humidity is all right, and that amount of water won't make you need to change the filter quickly. How do you tell? Well, we could make a suggestion for a week, but we don't have the data right now. Certainly, like you go down into your basement and look at your filter for your air conditioner. If it looks dirty, get rid of it. But I think you'll be able to tell if the machine is performing more difficultly or you're having trouble triggering. I would doubt that more than a week's time is good for these filters. So you're talking about maybe 3 filters a week at $3. They can get fairly expensive for a month's time over the next 10 to 12 months. It's not so cheap all of a sudden. So you'll have to balance that in your own mind. But as far as the performance of the more sophisticated devices, the adaptive servo ventilator probably being the most trigger sensitive, it may cycle off much more slowly and cause difficulty for higher pressure exposure and compliance to the patients. My suggestion maybe is you could take the IPAP max down a little bit so it doesn't run into the 20s for the patient, so they won't be more uncomfortable with it. And if it doesn't trigger on as much and you have a few more events, maybe you could just live with that. It won't be a serious health involvement, but the performance has been surprisingly good, at least with a new filter in place. So maybe I'll leave that with that, Dr. Al-Hukani.
So I just want one comment on what you said, Dr. Gaze. Actually, what I've been recommending and what we've been recommending locally is actually, obviously, if the filter is visibly soiled, is you should change it. But actually, some of our patients, we've been recommending to them to go up to 2 weeks even on the same filter, unless they're visibly soiled or damaged in any way. And so far, it seems to be, and this is based on what we've been doing, like looking 72 hours at least and dividing that in a 7-hour night, it seems to be sufficient.
That's very helpful information, and maybe you should try to keep track of that, because we do need more evidence to support what we're saying,
Of course,
and we just don't have it. So thank you very much.
100% concur, yeah.
Excellent. So what I'll do now, I'll start reading the questions that received from the audience. One of the questions stating that in the Middle East region, the humidifier is very important for patient compliance and comfort. So what do you recommend for those who need it? Would you replace the device? I think we did address this. And we said it's fine to use the filter, even with a humidifier. It seems it may be difficult to use it if you're using a heated tube humidifier. And we also spoke about when to replace it. Dr. Suleiman and Professor Peter Gay was clear. What about pediatrics patient here and their life support ventilator, as they are more sensible? And should we replace the device or the filter? Okay. That's one of the questions. Anyone who would like to answer?
It obviously depends on the device. I think most of the pediatric patients will be on devices that are not affected, but obviously that's the first step to look at, because at least in my experience, the pediatric patients that we have on are not on affected devices. If they are, I'm not sure that the pediatric patients would be as affected by changes in humidity. They're going to comply as they have before at the parental discretion.
Excellent. So now maybe I'll move here and ask Dr. Shireen, beside manufacture, repair, replace, what is most needed right now, Dr. Shireen?
I think the main thing is really dispensing information, educating and informing our patients, and providing them obviously the updates regarding the recalls and how to register their devices and things like that. I think also providing just a sense of calm and not to panic, that there's no wrong decision here. If you decide to continue the device, I think that all of the current specialists and the current societies all agree that the risk of complications, at least in the short term until the problem is fixed, is low, as based on the data that's come out so far. And I think that's the main thing. I mean, what we're doing at our hospital right now is we're creating also a similar type of letter and information link for our patients that we'll be distributing along our website and our social media, so that our patients can read more about it, be aware of it, and also register their devices early. And then we're available to kind of guide them as far as decisions regarding the continuation on their machines.
I might comment that there is a problem with the process here, that number that you give is not very helpful for the registration process, to the extent that if you think you're calling up to have them register it for you, they will not do that, at least in our country, and I doubt in yours. They will simply answer a few questions and refer you to the website. So particularly for the more elderly or those who are not adept, you're going to have to find a system to help them register the device. If they do not get the number in exactly right, they will be told their device isn't affected. And also, those that can't even get on the website, they will not be able to register. They will not get a replacement device. So that's been a problem for us. The only way you're registered is if you go on the website or somebody does it for you.
Let me ask, did anyone try the Philips website outside US and try the registration? Because I had an experience, but I need to hear it from anyone else.
So, I mean, we haven't actually tried, but I can tell you what our local Philips distributor is doing is they are actually calling patients, and they have been not registering, but gathering their serial data, their information, because again, everybody is in a different position. In Kuwait, most of our devices come from a single source. So they will be doing our registration for our patients when the time comes. And that's what we pushed really hard, because we know that not everybody has access to internet. Not all our patients have the technical know-how or to register these devices. So that's what we've been doing here in Kuwait.
Well, at least I'm opening the website now in front of me. There is, for non-US, for us, there's no way that the patients can click on and register. They have to call the 0044 UK number to go through it. So I spoke to Philips. They said they are going to hire a third-party vendor to take care of these issues, because it seems they're not allowed to take care of patients' information directly. Shireen, would you like to say anything? I saw you just raising your hand.
I was about to share that what we've done also is, because we have the same situation in Jeddah or in Saudi Arabia as in Kuwait, we have a single distributor for our devices. And so our hospital is working with them to create draft a legal document so that we can share with them our patient information for all the devices that were sold under our hospital. And they will be contacting the patients directly and registering them.
Excellent. Now, I have a question to Dr. Mary here. Allocation of limited supplies. How can we approach the most urgent need, the limited supply of devices for patients needing them?
Yeah, this is an important question, I think, not only for limited supply, because I'm not sure that there are capabilities right now to replace very quickly all the machines or to solve the problem very quickly. So we have to find a solution. And what we have done here is to classify our patient with whom into three categories: the ones who need life support and they are needing these heavier machines, so these patients are taken care by the supplier here, and the supplier is as Dr. Suleiman said, is taking care of putting them on the list for the replacement of the machine. And in the meantime, for patients who are really in need of another device, they can give them a machine, from another manufacturer.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary. Now, opening the question again here, I have a question from Sarah, who said, what about if someone removed the foam and used the device without the filter? So can we just remove these foams that's causing all the troubles? Maybe I'll ask Professor Beat again.
That's very interesting. Now, for the clever, obviously I cannot recommend this, but there is a YouTube site out already where someone is showing you how to peel out the polyurethane muffler, as I say, out of the plastic piece. And it's easier in the Omni Lab for those of you who have to do titration to take this foam out than it is the conventional device. And there may be a fix down the road where you bring it into your vendor and they actually come up doing this, but I can't see how that's going to be a practical solution. And if you take this apart and you can't get it together again, you've got nothing. So unless you're really, really good at this, I don't recommend this at all.
So I would also add, actually, so we've seen that video, and actually we've looked at this. I mean, we had an extra machine which we took apart and looked at. I do not recommend people do this in any way, shape, or form, please. And actually, even if you get the foam out, there's residual particles there that you actually can't clean or do anything about. So please do not recommend or do this at all.
Excellent. So another question, someone who said, I'm concerned about using a humidifier and filter in the same time, as the filter will block all the humidity and might increase the resistance of the circuit and might affect pressure therapy. Is it really safe to use a humidification and filter in the same time? Thank you.
I think initially you won't have much of a problem, but it will quickly change. And I don't think it's going to hurt anything more than you'll find out very quickly the answer to your question. I think it'll be pretty obvious. If you turn your humidity up a lot and soak that filter, it's inevitable that you will cause increased resistance and alter the performance. And I would worry if you got it really wet and it was working really hard that you might start to do damage to the machine. So our recommendation now, I understand the need for the heated humidity, but minimizing it or actually turning the heat off to use just a passover humidifier would be the preferred. I understand there's special patient consideration. And if you really have to turn it up, well, you try it and you get back to us and you tell us how long it lasted.
Well, thank you. Another question again from the Q&A said there are many patients are unaware about the recall in our region, and even many doctors. So let me ask a question here. Who is responsible for notifying patients and physicians?
Oh, I can tell you what the Mayo response was, that we went through our care orchestrator and we had the assistance of Philips to identify both from our patient database coupled with the care orchestrator. And we found about 7,000 connections from Mayo prescriptions to patients. Then we had our database eliminate the patients who just weren't using the device or who had passed away. And then we worked ourselves down to still about 2,000 that we need to contact. We have both patient portal online communication and we have a written letter. We feel an obligation to at least try to contact our patients. I don't know the numbers in your country. I imagine it's much higher. We have 2 letters. We have one in the first diamond, continue to use your device. Then it's a generic letter. We don't make a recommendation to continue or discontinue. We just alert them to the recall and to call their physician if they have questions. That's basically what we've done so far.
Excellent. So any experience from the region, I can talk about at least my practice. We did send even this webinar invitation along with the link of the Philips website to all my patients via emails. We do have many of them emails. It's a responsibility here to have the emails of the patients to send them their notice and other things. So we did send it to almost all my to our patients. And this is, I'm expecting now next week, there will be multiple and many calls and concern. How would you approach the large number? Now, at least in your practice, Professor Peter, you said you have 7,000.
We're getting 300 calls a day as of yesterday.
Now, would you just use your flow diagram and ask one of your nurse practitioners just to go around it, or would you see every one of them, or at least talk to them over the phone?
We have now 7 people on the telephone all day long, and they are actually doing pretty well getting most of them taken care of. But the recommendation is to see if they can satisfy them through the algorithm. Takes about 10 minutes to get through the algorithm quickly. If it's a problem patient, they identify the problem patient right away and tell them that they will try to have a physician contact them. There are several angry patients that emerge quickly. Beware.
I had that already. Now, especially someone who bought the devices just a few weeks before the recall. That was really tough, and I do understand. The question here, now there are people who've been using the devices for more than 5 years, and maybe the risk, again, according to the Philips website, are much more higher. Would you recommend them to maybe think about getting a new device at this moment?
It's going to come down to your rationing, and Dr. Suleiman's ABCD is going to probably be the guidance of who gets in line. I can tell you, if you come to the counter with $1,500 new money, the vendor is going to give you the device because they're hurting right now. They're not getting paid for their devices that they've stopped. So cash talks. I think there will be a run on ResMed machines, and they will run out. And Philips will not be able to keep up with this. So somewhere along the line, there's going to have to be some means to address ABCD, who gets one and who has to wait.
Interesting.
So I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
go
so
ahead.
I think also it depends. Go ahead, sorry.
Mary, would you like to say something? Or someone was talking at least.
Go ahead, Dr. Mary.
And I just had a question about the other devices. To my knowledge, they are all using, the manufacturer are using the same system. I mean, the main manufacturing system. Do we know if we replace one Philips machine by another machine from another manufacturer, that it is safer?
Yes, we do have evidence from it is a different foam in the ResMed device than the polyurethane that's used in the Philips. Now, if we did something to this 5 years from now and we start to clean it with a new device, is that foam going to degrade? Will we find carcinogens then? I don't know, but it's a completely different kind of foam, and it has been tested for these carcinogens, and there are no VOCs in the ResMed device to date that we know of.
And to add on that, I think there are companies, so ResMed has come out publicly. I think other companies have come out also publicly on their websites, like Fisher Paykel. I think you just have to, whatever is available locally. So we have other companies available locally, but we're not prescribing them until they provide. So all we can ask from the companies to provide proof that their machine does not have this problem, or come out publicly and say that before recommending these patients, these devices.
And at least as far as I know, that Philips is not under an obligation to buy you a new different machine. That fundamentally, if you go out and buy a different machine, it's going to be out of pocket personally.
Yes. Again, I guess it depends on locally what you're, again, here locally, Kuwait, the government provides most of our machines. So I think the other manufacturers are working closely in conjunction with them. But yes, I don't think Philips is under an obligation to pay for the devices.
Now, back to the Q&A. I have a question, but I'm not sure about this. Said Saudi FDA is asking to do an inspection of the devices and check if there is a problem. Does this make sense if we already have announcements by Philips?
Well, there are ongoing analyses. The basic testing is called an 18562. And what this is an analysis of toxicology and bacteriology of what's coming off of these devices. And one of the aspects of this 18562 is to look for a concept of biocompatibility. And bioincompatibility testing looks for DNA repair, chromosomal damage in an in vivo model of mouse cell exposure, and it can turn over fairly quickly. So they're looking at more immediate effects of these things. And now there's the time exposure necessity that goes with the 18562. Now, how are you going to get meaningful 1 year, 5 year data that's pertinent for us now? You're just not going to get it. But what I will tell you is that the most toxic one in terms of the carcinogenicity is the dimethyldiazine, and that seems to come off quickly and disappear. So there are some agents that do disappear quickly. In terms of the other, there's unpronounceable phenol compounds that they seem to come off in a much more continuous and slow fashion. So the older machine still may give off the phenols if exposed to the right environment. So if you have an older machine that was kept on a shelf in a cool room, now you move to a warm environment. Now you've got a new situation where that foam starts to degrade. It could be variable for any machine, any age. I hope that's not more confusing than helpful.
Well, I think that's really clear. So basically, it's really clear that unfortunately many of them, and with age, they increase the risk of the degradation. I have a question here from Rafiq, who said, what? Now, ResMed is clearly stated that they're not using the same material, but he's asking, what about the other manufacturers like Fisher and Paykel, Diebel-Bess? Do we know whether they are using the same material or not?
I can only speak for Fisher Paykel and ResMed that they do not. I do not know about DeVilbiss and some of the others.
Okay.
So we asked for Devil Bliss to provide this information. They, to date, we're waiting for them to provide information because I know locally we use a lot of Devil Bliss here in Kuwait.
Okay, well, again, back to the Q&A, Sarath is asking, is ozone sterilization may cause issues with other manufacturers' phones? Some people are insisting on sterilizing their devices.
I don't see right now how we can really justify using ozone with the new information that we have, because even ResMed, who uses a different foam, does not recommend using ozone cleaning because they do not test them under those conditions. But here we have evidence that ozone does accelerate by even a geographical suggestion. We likely use a lot more SoCleans and other ozone devices here in the US. We have much more reported degradation in the more affluent countries where the ozone cleaning devices are available. If that's the case, then at this time, until further evidence is clear, we are clearly telling our patients not to use ozone cleaning. And fundamentally, we've been sort of querying this all along. Listen, ozone doesn't clean, it sterilizes. And if you have something that's really dirty, you don't take the bottom of your bird cage and put it in ozone and clean it. It's still what's in the bottom of the bird cage. It's just got no bacteria in it. And you don't want to leave it there. So there's cleaning and there's sterilization. You still got to clean your device. So that would be my advice.
And this is really interesting because outside the CPAPs and the BiPAP devices, we've seen some car wash stating that we do sterilize your air conditioning and your maybe car with ozone. So this is really, that could be also a risk, a potential risk. If you're already sterilizing your air condition that may have a filters and you never know whether we're using the same material, that could be also a risk that you could inhale some carcinogenic from the air condition. Very interesting, and maybe we should stay away from ozone. Now, a couple of questions here. Now, they said, at your institution, have you been working with the risk management legal departments? Do we need to involve them?
It's just our practice at Mayo. All of the documentation that we've sent out, our team has worked very aggressively with, for example, pacemakers and hip joints. There's announcements years on end. We've got a lot of experience. So I think it just works better when you got a team. There's a lot of work to be done here, and you just feel more comfortable with language that we speak as physicians thinking for our patients, and they speak as lawyers and safety advisors. I think a team approach to this is the best way to do it.
I agree. We've already been meeting with our risk management and legal department at IMC. So I think that a team approach definitely is the best way.
Excellent. So one more question is, what about transitioning vent-dependent patient from hospital to home and from home to hospital?
Again, I don't think that's going to be a major issue because most of the life support ventilators are not being affected. So it's very important to identify the device that you're working with. And if it's a life support situation, it also really isn't that much of a situation because you have to use it. And if you can get a filter, use a filter. Even if you can't, you need to continue the ventilation. There's not much question there.
Well, that sounds really good. Now, you see, this recall came into middle of a pandemic where there is a very high need of ventilator, CPAPs, BiPAP across the world. And the question here, how is the similar concern facing practice in early pandemic? And would you change your approach if it was not pandemic and if you had enough devices available? Anyone?
I think it's much more pertinent to the Middle East and Europe. Maybe you can comment.
It is a burden, I could tell you. I spoke to Philips, asking them just to see if there are alternative and talking to other vendors. We have thousands of patients. Like one of the hospital in Abu Dhabi is having at least 4,000. Another hospital is 6 to 10,000. There's no one single vendor who can really get us the number of required devices in the next month or even 3 months. So it's really hard, and I'm having a replacement for all the patients, and if we follow the Philips notice there, stop and get another device if possible, it would be almost impossible. This is reality. I know what's written there is, again, as Professor Peter said, they're trying to protect themselves, maybe a lawyer advice, but when it comes to reality, there are not enough devices available in the market to cover all the affected patients.
I think also putting it in the perspective of the lack of any evidence that somebody got seriously ill from using the device, even with the polyurethane. I think when you put it in that perspective also, how much effort is everybody going in to try to replace devices, to educate patients, and to try to provide replacements when we know that there's just not going to be enough replacement devices available. I think that also, you have to put it in perspective. If a patient needs a ventilator, if a patient needs his CPAP or BiPAP, and they haven't had any issues with, allergies or with asthma or with bronchospasm, and you hope that within the next year, or 2 years, the issue with the polyurethane would be fixed and in their machine, how much do you, in weighing it, push to change their devices and to find alternatives when you know that we just don't live in a perfect world where we have that, capability to provide for everybody a new device.
It kind of brings you to the sleep lab situation where here you've got one night exposure and you have need to treat patients, and you have someone, say, high risk for OSA, and you really want to treat. What is one night exposure to the Omni lab and the laboratory going to do? Well, you're taking on risk. And what has happened in some patients here, even in the US, they have asked them to sign an informed consent, simply saying, look, we see a real need to have you studied so that we can understand your disease and recommend a device if you can get one. But by exposure to this, we don't know the risks. And we're telling you it's our best recommendation that you have a study but you will be at risk that is unknown to us now. Will you sign the informed consent with us saying, with our best current knowledge, we don't expect serious exposure? Is this acceptable for you to go on with a sleep study? And if the patient signs it, they do it. If it doesn't sign it and they want to wait, that's what happens.
Are you doing that at Mayo, or is any of the other physicians, are they doing that at their facilities?
I will say we have the luxury of having another brand to just eliminate the Omni Lab here, but I can tell you there's a very high level academic institution at a neighboring state with lots of my friends, and they have these informed consent letters sitting on their desk.
Well, that is really interesting. So again, and that did answer the last questions available here in the question and answer. Maybe we can call it for the end of our panel discussion. Again, I'd like to thank you all, Professor Peter Gay, Dr. Mary Lewis Kosa, Dr. Shireen Asyufi, and Dr. Sulaiman Khadada. Thank you very much for your time. This was very informal, and you did really answer very important questions that always comes and unfortunately is not written anywhere. And there's again a huge concern from both physicians and as well as patients. Thank you very much.
Dr. Al-Hukani, I thank you for putting this together. This was, I know, quite a bit of work for everybody, and it's a very fine effort you put forth. I will just put the disclaimer that I do not have any relationship with Philips. I will just say some bad things happen to some nice people that I know there, and we just have to deal with this. But I don't have any representation here from Mayo or anyone else. These are my opinions, but I hope we've shared them with you honestly. Thank you.
You did very well, and we're really happy to have you, having Dr. Sulaiman, Dr. Shireen, and Mary. Thank you again all, and I hope that this
much,
was
Dr.
really
Mohammed.
informative.
Yes, thank you very much. I second what Dr. Gay has said and all of that with the disclaimer included. So, and thank you for organizing this in short notice.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was lovely being part of this.
Thank you, and I wish you a good night for people in the Middle East, and a good day for Professor Peter Gay and anyone on the North America. Take care of it.